Welcome to the Self-Publishing School podcast. This is the podcast to listen to if you're an aspiring writer or an author who wants to be more successful. On this show, you'll learn how to write and launch a book successfully, all from the top authors and people just like you who are doing it at the highest level. I'm your host, Chandler Bolt, the founder of Self-Publishing School, the author of the book called Published, and the CEO of selfpublishing.com. For free training on how to publish a book that sells 10,000 copies, go to selfpublishing.com/free training. Hey, Chandler Bolt here, and joining me today is Dahlanda Coleman. Delanda is the author of multiple children's books, including the book More Than a Princess. She's sold over 25,000 copies. Come on now. 25,000 copies of her children's books, and founded the Sidney and Coleman Publishing Company and platform after being inspired by the birth of her daughter and dissatisfaction with the inadequate representation of children of color in the STEAM and STEM books. I'm excited to dive into a bunch of things, children's books. We were talking beforehand, we don't have a ton of children's book authors on the podcast, and especially children's book authors that have sold over 25,000 copies of their books as a first-time author, which is pretty freaking cool. We've gotten the pleasure of working with Delanda since 2020 as part of our Sell More Books programs on her book. And so we'll kind of break down some of that as a case study. So much to unpack. This should be a fun one. Delanda, welcome. Great to have you here.
Thank you for having me, Chandler. I'm super excited to talk about this.
So I guess first things first, for people who don't know, which includes me, what are ST? Is it STEAM? STEAM and STEM books. What is that?
So it's an acronym that stands for Science, Technology, Engineering, Art, and Math. And it's a paradigm that's going on in the children's book and education industry of just making sure that those core fundamentals are taught at the early ages of education.
Got it. Okay, that makes sense. Because your background, if I'm not mistaken, is product marketing, product management, Amazon, bunch of big companies.
Yeah, I worked at big brands like Microsoft, Amazon, Vimeo, all in the technology space. And that was sort of I've been in technology my entire career, and that has been the inspiration for me. As you mentioned, when my daughter was born, I was reading a lot of books to her. Like, I'm the type of mom that, you go to the grocery store, I see a book, I'm going to pick it up, and I'm going to come home with groceries and a book. But a lot of the books that I were picking up for girls essentially were about princesses, which is awesome. But a lot of the themes were around, being a nice princess or a pretty princess, very soft topics. Or when I picked up books with children or characters of color, which they leaned into very important themes like skin confidence and hair confidence and, just being confident in the world, which are great. But me as a professional coming from the technology sector, I wanted to see more books that had representation with people of color as well, and especially in the STEM fields.
That's cool. And I think it's a cool example of, for a lot of people watching or listening, blending your worlds, right? Which is, the tech and product management side of things, but then also being a mom and saying like, hey, I want you to learn this stuff over here.
Yes.
And blending that. What would be kind of your tips for folks who are maybe seeing, it's not the exact same themes as what you're seeing, but kind of like blending worlds in their mind of like, okay, hey, I'm involved in this world over here. I've got kids that I want to learn these essential things. I think that I want to crystallize that into a children's book. What are kind of the lessons you learned from that on how to do that well?
Well, most importantly, I realized that I know a lot of things that can easily be unpacked and shared with my daughter. And I knew a lot of people who had knowledge who can actually help me craft or hone it in. So I especially encourage people who are in STEM-based fields, like, a lot. So sharing that with your children in a book form is really transformative. And I would certainly encourage people to do that. And I know you teach that, like writing down what most of us are knowledge workers in the sense that, we sit at a desk and we're mined for the knowledge in our head. And so extracting that into down to the simplest forms and communicating it to kids is really going to be helpful in transforming them. And a lot of the knowledge that kids learn is actually taught at home. It's not taught
Mm-hmm.
in schools. And so the more that you can infuse what you know from work in simple ways and translating it into kids, not only can you be a transformative agent for your children, but for other
Mm-hmm.
children as well.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Now, so your book, More Than a Princess, I know that's one of the biggest sellers, and that's the kind of the first one, and it sparked a lot of this. Obviously, has had huge success. How many? Do you remember how many words is that book?
It's about, I want to say 700 to 800 words. It's
Okay.
not a lot of
Yep.
words at all. And
Yep.
that's another big theme that you definitely want to narrow in. Depending on the type of children's book that you're writing, you should know, you can, you don't have to make it as daunting as you think it is. So if you're
Mm-hmm.
doing a picture book, being around 700 words, if you're doing a board book, it's around 10, 15 words. It's really small. You don't have to, you can lean more into the imagery than the
Mm-hmm.
words. And so imagery and words matter. Now, as the kids get older and they get more independent in reading, that's when you start increasing the length depending on the type of book that you're offering. And so a lot of authors I notice make, that mistake. And when they start writing too much for
Yeah.
5-year-olds that can't read.
Yeah. That's good. Let's unpack that a little bit because for people who aren't familiar, so the different types of children's books, obviously based on age, your kind of ideal reader and stuff. So you talked about board books being more of 10 to, 10, 15 words, 20 words, mostly pictures. You talked about picture books. That's kind of like, I think that's at least what I think of when I think of children's books. And that's kind of the more classic thing that we teach, whereas about in the 750 word range. And so I think you said yours was 800 words. Then going up from there, what are the other types of children's books and about how long are they, depending, kind of matching to the age of the kid and that sort of thing?
Yeah, well, then the next level, you'll probably get to early reader books. So these are
Mm-hmm.
kids who are starting to learn sight words and they know the basics of reading a full sentence.
Mm-hmm.
Those start to creep up into like the 2,500
Mm-hmm.
words. They still rely on pictures, but maybe you don't have to go full color, sketches and things like that.
Right.
And then the next is chapter books. So these are, 10 to 13 chapters, probably 10,000 words. And then
Mm-hmm.
you start to get into young adult, which is more borderline novels. You
Yep.
could start extending yourself. And
Mm-hmm.
so, but just know like when you're starting with picture books, it's 16 spreads. So or 2 pages open left and right.
Mm-hmm.
And on those pages, it's very few words,
Mm-hmm.
2 sentences each page at most. And so it kind of gives you, if you want to start writing picture books, that kind of gives you a nice framework just to have 16 scenes with with 4 sentences on each of them and
Yeah.
just keeping it really tight like that.
That's cool. Yeah. And we've got some templates for folks in our children's book school and also on our website if you want to see that kind of those 16 spreads, like you're saying, and 16 scenes and leading up to 750 words. So we got the kind of the lay of the land for children's books. All right. So you got board book, 10 to 20 words, picture book, 750 words or so. You got early readers, let's call it 1,500 to 2,500 words. You've got chapter books, probably around 10,000 words. And then you've got young adult, which, as you said, kind of borderline novels. So those are the types. Let's go traditionally what people think about with picture books and what your book is about 750 words. How do you do that? I think that's probably like the big question on a lot of people's minds. It's like, all right, I've got this big, complicated topic, right? Especially something like this, science, technology, all this stuff, and kind of trying to weave in those themes. So what are your tips for how to kind of tell a concise, punchy story that's entertaining, that moves along, like managing your word count? Like, how did you do it? And what did you learn from that experience that might be helpful for other children's book authors?
Yeah, well, I can tell you what I did in the beginning that was a mistake, and that I was too much in my head, right? Like I had this idea, I just wanted to tell different career perspectives. Like I said, I had this daughter, and I wanted her to show her that she could be more than just a princess. And so in the beginning, what I did is that I just kept mulling and mulling over this idea over and over again. And it would become daunting because I'm not a what I would call a career author by trade. You know, I write, business. Basically, I write emails all day. So my confidence was not very high. And so one of the key things that I started doing was mind mapping. And I know that you teach the strategy, but I started getting the core idea out and then the branching out into the other ideas and writing down what do other princesses do? Well, in my case, she was an astronaut. So I started writing down core things that astronauts do. She was a doctor. So I started writing down ideas. So I just started mind mapping all the different ideas that I had. And because I was limited on the number of words, I really got down to the core things. So I was able to like scratch things out. And by the end, I had like a nice outline of the four scenes that I wanted to have, the intro and the outro, right? And so that's kind of how I played it out and then wrote it. And I did co-author it with my husband, and he was able to, come in and then take the outline and the structure and make it rhyme, which is really hard to do. He's just more
Ah,
talented like that. Yeah.
nice. That's cool. And that's kind of a cool division of responsibilities with a book. Because I always say, I co-authored my first two books, and I think it's the hardest thing to do. It's like, I always say it's kind of like painting a painting, but having two hands on the paintbrush.
hmm
It's really hard. So, any tips or lessons learned from that of co-authoring a children's book? And especially, I mean, you almost had the double whammy. You're co-authoring a children's book, but then also co-authoring a children's book with your spouse. So
Yeah.
that's tricky. How'd you do that? And any lessons learned there?
Well, one, I had to lock him in the house for a weekend. So I, by the time we got around to our second book, we had kind of learned the lessons from the first one. And so we kind of brainstormed, we sat down and brainstormed on what was the idea for the second book. And we had really crystal
Mm,
clear on what the idea was. The second thing that I did, because I in my second book, I use a concept called the engineering design process, which is a problem solving methodology that a lot of computer scientists or just,
mm,
scientists use to solve problems. And so we interwove those core concepts into the book and into the things that were happening in the book. So,
cool.
having that framework and then telling that story in that lens was super important. So it made
Hmm.
editing really easy because I wanted to make sure that he had a testing phase, as an example, or he had a iterative phase where he redid something over after learning from a mistake. So it was very simple once the second time around for us to do that because we had a core idea. We knew what our limitations was in terms of how much we were writing, and then
Hmm.
it was very quick. So we actually wrote the second book in a day, literally.
Oh my gosh.
Yeah,
Wow.
it was very simple,
That's
just
wild.
writing it. And the
Yeah.
second thing that I would say is that I kind of let go. After that one day we wrote it, we let it flow, it
Hmm.
flowed out of us, and I immediately handed it off to an editor. Um, which in the beginning, when we wrote our first book, part of the reason it took so long was because, I was constantly tweaking and editing and doing, kind of like in my head again
Hmm.
with all the edits. And I didn't do that the second time around.
I see. Got it. So that's the lesson learned from book one to book two. And then the second book that you wrote in a day, which book was that?
What's my superpower? So
Okay, cool.
very similar, but it teaches the engineering design process with a boy protagonist instead of a girl.
Cool.
I got a
Nice.
lot
And
of boy moms that came after me, asked me, when am I going to have a book for my son?" So
that's cool. And I think you have a son as well, right? So is that part of what inspired that?
no, just
Oh, I
one
made that up.
daughter. Yeah,
Okay,
but
got it.
my husband was the face of
I
the
see.
the little kid.
Got it. Cool. That's awesome. So And so these are some kind of good lessons learned on the writing process from book one to book two. And I think when I was looking on Amazon, book one has 1,100 plus reviews. Book two has 200 or 300, I think, when I checked earlier today. So both are obviously doing well. We'll come back to the review piece here in just a second. And actually, we'll come back to the launch piece here in just a second. Let's walk through quickly kind of the production process. So once you've got the book done and or the words of the book done, how did you go from, all right, words done to illustrations and like a publishable book, and any lessons learned there?
Yeah, so what I would do is I then create what I call an illustration brief. And so I tell the potential illustrator kind of like what my vision is. So I tell them I give them a little backstory about the character that might not necessarily be in the manuscript. I give them the actual manuscript. I also say, here's the character's favorite colors. Here's some of the character's personality traits. And I also say, here are my favorite colors. Here are some character inspiration. So I go on Amazon, grab copies of book covers, and I synthesize all of that. And I say, this is the format of the book. You know, it's an 8x10 book. It has 32 pages. And then I also just everything that I want. I want an ebook. I want a hardback. I want a paperback. Here are the templates that you can download to make sure that it's sized correctly. And here are the formats that I want it back in. Yeah. And so I typically, when hiring an illustrator, now that I have established relationships with some illustrators, I don't have to keep doing this. But in the beginning, when you're looking for one, I actually test at least 3. So I asked for a character design, and based on what I just described in my illustration brief, and I pay them all. So I will ask, 3 illustrators that I find, can you design a character? And here's what the character looks like. Here's what he or she does, etc. And then I see what comes back. And I'm usually testing for a couple of things. I'm testing, can they draw to my vision? Can they adhere to a deadline? Can they take feedback and revisions? And so that's really important because you're going to be working with them for a few weeks or a few months. And I have worked with illustrators who are not very timely or who don't write to your vision. And so understanding that process and making sure that you find somebody that meets that is super important.
That's great. I like that a lot. That's really good feedback. So let's shift gears, because I'm sure this is the part that a lot of people are curious about, to the launch, to selling books, to all that stuff. So how did you launch the book well, and the first book, and what sold the most copies of that book?
Well, when I launched the first book, More Than a Princess, all I did was I went through the entire process of producing the book, and then went through the entire process of getting it onto Amazon. And then I hit send, and that was that. And then I went to bed, and kind of like nothing really happened. But miraculously, I got my sales report from Ingram, because I uploaded both to Ingram and Amazon. And I had sold 125 copies, and I hadn't done anything. And so
You're kidding.
Yeah. And I was just like, wow, what just happened? I've done nothing, and I sold 125. So imagine if I did something. So, I did enroll in the Sell More Books course that you offered, and got a coach. And what I did next was I just activated my community and my friends and family. I think that was the most empowering thing that I could have done. I didn't have a platform. I didn't have an email list at the time. So I just activated on everywhere. So Facebook, LinkedIn, and Instagram. I made posts about, this is what I'm doing. I really would like your help in being a launch is successful. And this was of March of 2020. So you can see where this was going. Luckily, we snuck in my book launch the week before everything shut down.
You're kidding.
But yeah, it was crazy. But we had hand sanitizers at the event. Luckily, we had the event, but literally the next week, the whole world shut down. But the important thing about that was that, I started just gathering my friends and family's email address to say, hey, join my launch team. I'm going to need your help in getting reviews for this book. And that was like the key thing that I did
Mm-hmm.
when I started relaunching on Amazon. And so I think that actually got me to number one. And that also got me my first set of reviews, which were really
Mm-hmm.
critical, I think, for the longer term success.
I see. Got it. So put the book out. Didn't really do much at first. It
Mm-mm.
miraculously starts selling copies. And you say, hey, let's really go for this. Join the Sell More Books program. Started working with one of our coaches. Sounds like the launch team was a really helpful concept and to kind of relaunch, if you will, the book. Then obviously having the book launch party right before COVID, all that stuff. What else would you say worked well? Like, were there two or three biggest takeaways from the Sell More Books program or your coaching? I think Scott was your coach, if I'm not mistaken.
Yeah.
Like, was there a couple things from that really moved the needle the most in terms of book sales?
Yeah, just making sure that I had my listing optimized and set
Mm-hmm.
up correctly, and then doing that launch team. And I utilize those resources to this day. I mean, as by the time I got to my second book, I was much more sophisticated. Like I had an opt-in page. I was collecting email address and phone numbers.
Mm-hmm.
So I was texting folks, and I had a much more smoother process. And I had built up a list by then. So
Mm-hmm.
I got to 25 very quickly in the first week. But I definitely launching reviews, and you might actually do that at a loss in the beginning. I would say that, at the beginning of your book launch, it's really not about making money. It's really about setting it up for longer term success.
Mm-hmm.
The second thing that I did was I definitely did a lot more speaking engagements and talking about the book, hopping on others' podcasts, collaborating with other authors, and doing like really fun events.
Cool.
And I think the third and most significant is investing in ads and having a
Cool.
sustained ad budget.
Mm-hmm.
I definitely would say in this market, online, it's very competitive. And so just making sure that you're getting your book in front of folks is going to be really important.
Got it. And so on the ad side of things, what are you mostly running ads on Amazon? Are you going BookBub? Are you going somewhere else? And what's worked well? How are you doing that?
Amazon ads.
Yep.
Yeah. I think, for me, that has worked really well. And especially in the children's book category. I've
Mm-hmm.
tried other sites. They just haven't had as much success for me, but Amazon has been really successful. And I think a part of that is, again, making sure you have your back end keywords set up
Yep.
correctly, titles, subtitles, really great cover, as well as, utilizing all the marketing tools that they have. So your description, A+ content,
Yep.
having your author page set up. I think those have been beneficial.
Mm-hmm. That's
Yeah.
cool. Yeah. And if people are confused by a bunch of that stuff, we go in detail on that on a bunch of other podcast interviews. This is also something that since you joined, we've started helping people with. So we now do A+ content for people and book descriptions and keywords and categories optimization, all that stuff. So it sounds like speaking engagements and engaging the community. It sounds like Amazon ads really worked well. Have you done much many like as far as speaking gigs? I'm assuming most of that was virtual during COVID. Is that correct, or have you done many in-person speaking gigs?
It's starting to come back in person now,
Mm-hmm.
but mostly a lot of it during COVID was obviously 100% remote, which was great. Some of them were
Mm-hmm.
paid. So some of them were paid with books and some of
Cool.
them were free, but it was great advertising. A lot of people did things that I didn't even ask for, which I'm really grateful for. A lot of people read my book and post it on YouTube, which I love.
Cool.
So to me, it's like free advertising.
Yeah.
So being able to, look at that content or, be on people's platforms has been really great, a great opportunity for me. And then I've also started graduating and like coaching people on how to
Mm-hmm.
write their books, their children's books specifically. And I really enjoy helping folks bring their vision to life.
Cool. And so when people were sharing your book on YouTube, like was that prompted or just totally unprompted?
I'm prompted. So I occasionally Google myself to see what pops up. And and quite often what popping up more frequently than lately is, folks reading my book. And I
Mm-hmm.
just think that's awesome. I love that.
That's cool. Have you ever done any in-person speaking gigs at schools?
Not in person yet. Oh, actually, I take that back. Yes, I have. I've done a couple of in-person ones, especially at my daughter's school. So, like, if
Cool.
you are
Yeah.
a parent and an author, um, utilizing your children
Yeah.
is really helpful. So, one of the secret things that I learned now is just how to do market research. And my daughter was the one who taught me this really important lesson. So, in the beginning, when we were writing the first book, I would print out copies and, I would have copies that would have markup all over the house. And she stole a copy and took it to school and showed her classmates and her teachers, and they read the book to the student. And so when I picked her up, the teacher was like, "Hey, we read your book." And I was like, "What?" It was like, "It's really good. We love it. When are we going to get the real one?" And so the second time around, I preemptively gave them copies of the book. Like, what do you think of
Mm.
this? What are some
Oh,
good
cool.
elements? So I
Yeah.
think, just utilizing the resources around you,
Yep.
um, you'll be very successful.
That's super smart. And I know if folks want to check out the episode we did with Emma Sumner on children's books, and Emma's one of our youngest authors. She was 8 years old when she wrote her kid's book, but then went into schools or went into her school specifically. I think she got a $250 or $400 honorarium to speak. And then they pre-sold a ton of books, which I think is just a super smart strategy. So they sent slips home with every student to say, "Hey, we've got an author coming to speak. Do you want to get one of their a copy of their book?" And then you can just check yes or no, and then attach a check or cash or whatever to that. And then, so they were actually able to pre-sell a ton of books. I think they ended up doing 1,200 or 1,400 bucks from Emma's first speaking gig. And so since then, I feel like that's been a model that a lot of our children's book authors have been doing. And it's just a little bit of a grassroots kind of, obviously easiest, as you said, to go to
Yeah.
your kids' school first, but then expanding that, to the county, expanding that maybe to your region or state, and just it just seems like a really smart way to sell books that a lot of our authors have been having success with. I want to touch on a few more things on the book sales and marketing side of things, and then we'll wrap up. But so I think I saw a stat somewhere of well, actually, I'll just back up. I know we've covered a lot on the journey to 25,000 copies sold. At what point did you hit 10,000? And at what point 25,000? And was it kind of like slow, 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 boom? Was it an immediate, like, what was that your kind of journey like?
I would say it ramped up uh, slowly in the
Mm-hmm.
beginning, mostly because one, I did nothing in the beginning. Then I took some time to get some training and figured out, okay, let me launch this and let me focus on a quality launch with focusing on reviews. And then once I did that, then I began focusing on ads and figuring out how to work ads. So it took a while. I would say it probably took like 6 or 7 months to kind of get into a groove. Um, and then I started releasing, supplemental material like coloring books, notebooks, journals. And so that helped increase the number. And then releasing a second book. And when I released the second book, I released a series all at once. I had the activity book and the workbook and
Ah,
the
cool.
children's
Mm-hmm.
books. So I saw doubling once obviously you double the amount of books that you had in the marketplace. So
Right.
one thing that I would say is like, you know, don't release just one book if it's a business. If it's a hobby, that's one thing. But if you are starting a business, thinking about releasing more than one book at a time or
Yep.
in a very quick succession.
Hey, Chandler Bolt here. I hope you're loving this episode so far. It's time to go from inspiration to implementation. All right, so if you've learned something, we want to help you implement what you've learned with your book. So what I want you to do right now is go to selfpublishing.com/schedule, book a publishing consultation with one of the experts on my team. We'll talk about your goals for your book, your dreams, your challenges, your next steps, and we'll start putting together a plan. All right, so go to selfpublishing.com/schedule, book a call with the team. Let's see how we can help with your book. It's time to implement.
And then I would also say just releasing more books.
Yep.
So that's when I saw the ramp or the scale go up really quickly, is when I started introducing more.
That's cool. And now, on that note, I was on your site earlier and I saw that you're selling a bunch of your stuff through what looks to be like a Shopify store on your
Mm-hmm.
site,
Yeah.
in addition to Amazon. What percentage of your books would you say are selling on Amazon versus selling on your own site? And why sell on your own site? Like, what's kind of your thought process behind that?
Yeah, so the margins for books are very thin. And so once you start selling a volume, I started thinking about how do I diversify where I'm selling. So beyond Amazon, and of course, Shopify was very easy to start. Um, and then I wanted to drive the cost down. So I actually started printing books overseas. So that was another strategy. So my strategy simply was to bring in more per per unit per book.
I
So
see.
very
Hmm.
simple strategy.
Hmm.
But that does require an investment in marketing
Right.
outside of Amazon. And so
Hmm.
started doing Facebook ads. I also started doing more bulk sales.
Hmm.
So that's been really helpful, selling into schools or organizations that want to buy in bulk.
Cool.
And, selling more of a system rather than just a book. Right.
Oh,
So,
cool.
yeah.
So let's talk about that, selling in bulk and selling a system over just selling a book. How are you getting bulk orders? What's kind of the average size of the bulk order? And then what do you mean by selling a system versus just selling a book?
Yeah. So two ways. One, I make sure that my contact information is in the book. So a lot of people
Hmm.
start their book search on Amazon. So they might have bought something for their own kid, or someone in their family liked it and then want to take it to their organization. So
Hmm.
making sure that you have your website information and social media handles in the book so that you're
Yep.
discoverable is super important.
Hmm.
Um, the second thing, so a lot of people reach out to me that way. They discover me on Amazon and want to buy in bulk. And so I would give over a certain price point, I would give a discount.
Hmm.
The other thing is that I would talk to the local schools and universities, or not universities, but bookstores in my neighborhood. So consignment is a big one for bookstores. So I would leave my book on consignment and we would just true up within a month's time.
Hmm.
And then cold calling and reaching out to schools and programs. And luckily I
Heck
have,
yeah.
smart people in my network who have connections. And so asking people for connections and like seeing how this could be done. So a lot of it is
Let's
just good
go.
old sales work.
Yeah, I love it. I
Yeah.
love it. Reaching out to connections, getting referrals, and doing calls. Have you had success with that with schools? Like, what is that? Who are you calling? Is it the principal? Is it an administrator? And is the pitch just, hey, we can do a bulk sale. I'll come in and speak, or is it something else?
Sometimes it's as easy as that. It depends on the school district. So
Hmm.
I usually get in contact with, like, there's someone who's in charge of the literacy program or
I
some
see.
special program that might have a budget, and I can
There we
speak my
go.
way in through that way.
Looking for that budget. Come on now.
Yeah.
Who's
um,
got the budget? That's really the answer to that question, right? So who's got the budget to pay for the books?
Exactly.
Hmm.
Or you might have to, depending on the state, become like a official vendor of the state, which takes a
Oh, I see.
process,
Hmm.
and you could procure it through that way. I haven't personally gone through that route, but it's something that's on my sort of wish list for 2024 to get,
Yeah.
certification so that you can get in more easily.
Hmm.
The other things that I've done is summer school programs have actually used my
Mm.
book as part of their
Hmm.
STEM curriculum. So they use the book, they'll get inspirations, they'll have a week dedicated, and they'll use my book and the activity book that comes along with it as a program. So that was something unexpected that I didn't see.
Yeah.
And they just bought the book in bulk and gave it out to the kids. And then I was able to come and do a reading, which was really cool.
Cool. That's awesome. That's cool. So, I saw a stat, I think somewhere on your site. You've done six figures from children's books. And I think a lot of people would hear that and like, what in the world? Like, is that even possible? So how'd you do it? And is that mostly off of book sales? Is that mostly on the bulk book side of things? Like, what does that look like to actually do that?
To be honest, it's mostly off of Amazon
Cool.
sales, and
Yeah.
it's just, being consistent. So a lot of people want to get the bestseller, you know, mark, which is a great mark, but I think it's just
Mm-hmm.
marketing. What's really important is that you consistently stay in the top 1 or top 10 of a book category
Mm-hmm.
that you're in. And so for me, that's how I got there. I didn't do it overnight. It's been since we launched the book in January 2020. So it's been, nearly 4 years of just consistently investing in an advertising budget and then
Mm-hmm.
tweaking your ads and just being consistent
Mm-hmm.
and releasing more books.
It's great. It's
Yeah.
great. Delanda, this has been awesome. What would be your parting piece of advice for the children's book authors out there, maybe first time, or maybe they've already published, or the Delanda from years ago before you went on this journey, knowing what you know now?
I wouldn't have waited. Becoming an author was like a dream of mine for
Mm-hmm.
years. And at the time I don't do resolutions anymore. Now I do vision boards, but at the
Yeah.
time I would write my New Year's resolution and it would be to be an author. And then the next year I would get there and it would still be on the list. It wouldn't be one
Mm-hmm.
of the items that I crossed off. So I would say
Yeah.
many people have these best-selling ideas in their head
Yes.
and they never get it out of their head and onto paper.
Mm-hmm.
And I would just say, if I could do this over again, I wouldn't wait. I would have just started. And honestly, I feel like the books that I wrote after my first book has been the best, have been better because they've just
Mm-hmm.
gotten better and better. But
Mm-hmm.
the first book was the one that really took off. And I would just imagine if I had just never done that,
Yeah.
if I had never done that, I wouldn't have be where I am today. So I would just say my biggest piece of advice is just to write, get it out of your head. Don't do it alone. Get
Mm-hmm.
support with an editor or or your school, but
Mm-hmm.
definitely just get started.
That's good. That's really good. Well, awesome, Delanda. This has been so great. Where can people go to find out more about you, to buy your books, all that good stuff?
Well, you can certainly find them on Amazon, Target, or Walmart.com. Or you can visit my website at sydneyandcoleman.com. And there you can see all our books and all the things that we do and our mission. And you could definitely contact me there as well, too.
Awesome. Well, guys, if you want to chat with our team about working with us as part of our children's book school or our similar books program is the one that Delanda went through, go to selfpublishing.com/apply. The team would love to speak with you, talk to you about your book, your goals for your book, next steps, all that good stuff, and see how we can help. So selfpublishing.com/apply. Go there, book a call with the team, and go grab a copy of Delanda's book, More Than a Princess. We've got What's Your Superpower? We got a bunch of other great books. Obviously, she said available on Amazon or on her website. Delanda, so cool being a part of your journey. The best is yet to come.
Thank you. I appreciate you.
Thank you so much for watching or listening to this episode of the Self-Publishing School podcast. I know there's so many places that you could be spending your time. There's other podcasts that you could be listening to, YouTube channels that you could be watching. So thank you so much. It means the world. Now, I want you to do 3 things right now if you found this episode helpful. All right, number 1, I don't know if you know this, but we've got a YouTube channel. It's a companion channel to this podcast. All the video versions of the episode are on the YouTube channel. So number 1, subscribe to the YouTube channel. Number 2, if you're listening to this podcast wherever, whether this is Spotify, Apple Podcasts, number 2, I want you to subscribe to this podcast right now so you don't miss a future episode. And then number 3, this is probably the most important, leave a review on the podcast. All right, reviews are super important and help this podcast get discovered by other people. So number 3, leave a review on the podcast. Thank you so much. I'll see you in the next episode. If you're on the fence about scheduling a publishing consultation call with my team, maybe you're not quite ready for that, I've got some free training that I think will be really helpful for you. All right, all you have to do is go to register to sign up. Go to selfpublishing.com/free training. When you do, you're also going to get a free digital copy of my new book, Published And on that training, you're going to learn the next steps, so how to implement with your book. So how to write, how to publish, how to launch successfully. So go to register right now at selfpublishing.com/free training. I'll see you there.